Hare Krishna. Welcome back to our study of the Yoga Sutras. So, in the previous sutra, we just saw an introduction to the book. In this particular sutra, which is sutra number 2 of the first chapter, Samadhi Pada, we are going to see what is perhaps the most popular sutra in the book and also the most important sutra of the book. And this is how it goes. Yogas chitta vritti nirodha. Right? What does it mean? Yoga is chitta vritti, means modifications of the consciousness, nirodha or restraint. Right? So let us recite this. Yogas chitta vritti nirodha. Right? So what does it mean? Let us see the translation. To restrain the modifications of consciousness is yoga. So this is the defining verse of this book, where Patanjali is going to present upfront, why are you here? Why should you be reading this book? Right? So this book, Yoga Sutras, is meant for those who want to restrain the modifications of the consciousness. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha. Right? So this is the defining sutra or the Paribhasa Sutra, where any person who wants to understand what is coming up later in the book, or at a certain point later on in the book, if you're confused, hey, what is this book actually talking about, or what is this practice leading up to? If anybody has any confusion, one has to come back to this sutra and understand the purpose of reading this book. Right? This is a very, very important sutra for us to understand. Right? As I said, this is the defining sutra. So what is the definition? Many times we understand the word yoga as some kind of physical exercise, as asanas, or some kind of breath practices like pranayama, or even sometimes people tend to interpret yoga as some kind of mindful living and so on, right? But here we see from the definition that the author Patanjali has given, yoga is beyond all of this. It's about focusing on chitta. It's about engineering the chitta. It's about fine-tuning the chitta and restraining its fluctuations or modifications. Now, as we understand the depth of the subject matter here, the first obvious question that will come up is, what is this chitta that Patanjali is referring to, right? So to understand this, we are going to go back to our foundational philosophy. If you remember, in the previous session, I explained how yoga philosophy is heavily based on the Sankhya philosophy. And within the Sankhya philosophy, there are these two popular terms that are used, which are called Purusha and Prakruti. Right? In simple language, Purusha means the spirit soul, according to the Sankhya terminology. That is us, all forms of life. Right? That life which you see in varieties of forms, whether be it humans or animals or birds or insects or amoeba or bacteria, it's all a form of life. And that living force, the soul, is what is called as the Purusha. And the world around us, all these elements of nature, the 24 elements that Sankhya philosophy elaborates about, is the Prakruti. Right? To put it in very, very simple, easy to understand language, the Purusha here is the soul and Prakriti here is matter. Now, the Vedic science explains the nature of these two as the soul being Sat. Sat means a sense of permanence, eternality. And when something is eternal, it also indicates that it is unchanging. On the contrary, the characteristic of Prakriti, or of this world, which is in Sanskritam, it is called as Jagat. Jagat means that which is constantly changing. It is always in a state of a dynamic flux. Because it is constantly changing, right, its nature is called as Asat, or temporary or changing. Now, this is where the big challenge comes. How is it that the soul, which is unchanging, interacting with the world, which is constantly changing? These are completely opposites, like oil and water, which can never mix. And yet, the mystery is these two are working together with such synchrony. So what is facilitating this interaction between these two opposites? whenever there is an interaction happening between two totally different entities, there has to be the need for an interface. And that interface is what is called as the chitta in the yoga terminology. The chitta is that flow of consciousness from the soul, which is causing its cognition, its emotions, and even certain designations that it identifies with in the process of interacting with this temporary changing world. That is what is the chitta. Now, within the yoga terminology, this chitta is said that it expresses itself through the channel called as the mind, intelligence, and ego. Right? This is going slightly technical here. Right? Now, usually when we think of any of these cognitive, emotional functions, we usually just call it as the brain, right? But brain is just a physical hardware. There's a whole software running inside. And this software has three further divisions. The mind, which is characterized by the function of thinking, feeling, and willing. Our thoughts, our feelings, our desires, that inner space where these three take place is what is called as the mind. Intelligence is that inner space where discrimination happens, where rational thought process happens, right? Where we're able to discern between right and wrong. And not just discrimination, but even the ability to stick to right. That determination is also a function of intelligence. That is discrimination and determination. So while we said mind was thinking, feeling, and willing, intelligence was discrimination and determination. The ego is that sense of identity, that sense of I-ness. I am a man, I am a woman, I'm an Indian, I'm an American. So these identities that we carry are also the function of that inner space. In short, chitta is operating in all these three domains. Now, why is all of this happening, right? To all of these basically cumulatively define our experiences of life, right? In fact, this chitta is such a powerful aspect of our being which we do not know, but literally every experience that we undergo is defined by the chitta. Right? I'll give you a very, very simple example. Imagine you just bought your cherished car, something that you have been waiting for such a long time. Maybe you've been saving money over the past 10 years to buy this car, your dream car. And on the day when you went to the showroom to buy this car, all of a sudden, just as you're receiving the key of your car, your 10 years of intense longing, and that moment has come now when you're going to fulfill your desire. And at that moment, your phone rings and you hear the very unfortunate news of the death of your best friend. How will you feel at that moment? Suddenly, your chitta will be overwhelmed with some emotions of pain, separation, right? And that interaction that you're having with your favorite car is going to transform into a very painful experience. So this goes on to show that our version of reality is shaped by the state of the chitta. And therefore, managing the chitta is very, very important if you want to manage your own life. And therefore, yoga begins with the understanding of chitta vritti nirodha, or learning to restrain the fluctuations of the chitta, right? And this brings us to a very, very important aspect. What is happiness? Many times we think happiness is a result of some action, result of going to a particular place, result of playing a particular kind of a sport, and so on, or reading your favorite book, etc. These are just external ways of trying to find happiness. But rather, what is happening? What is the inner mechanics in all these activities? Yeah? Try to understand this. I'll give you another very pertinent example. Think of eating your favorite sweet, right? You have the first serving and you're so excited to have that sweet, right? You are thrilled and you're experiencing so much of happiness as with every bite you are experiencing the sweet spread all to the tongue. Every single taste bud is coming in contact with that sweet, right? And you're experiencing bliss, right? And as soon as you're done with the first serving, you are tempted to eat one more. So you have the second serving, and perhaps a third, and then somebody forces you to have the fourth, and then the fifth, and they completely oblige you into having the sixth and seventh serving. At a certain point, now you are full. You no more want to have that sweet. And at that moment, the sight of that sweet becomes a terrorizing experience. Now, this is where the question comes, that what is happiness? Is happiness really the interaction of the sweet with the taste buds? If that were to be the case, then the sweet has not changed from the first serving to the seventh serving. Our taste buds have not changed from the first serving to the seventh serving, but something else changed within us. What is that? It is our chitta. During the first serving, the chitta was completely absorbed in the prospect of enjoying that sweet. In the seventh serving, because your stomach is full or because you got bored or whatever, your chitta, your mind is no more in that activity. Right? So this goes on to show that happiness is not merely the contact of external objects with our senses, but rather happiness is a state of absorption of the mind. Happiness is a state where the chitta is in a state of balance. And this is the important principle that we understand from this sutra. Because the nature of this chitta, because it is an interface between matter and spirit, it has to speak both the languages. Matter speaks the language of change, and the soul speaks the language of unchange. So it has both the characteristics of changing and not changing, a sense of temporariness and a sense of permanence. That's the nature of chitta. So the more the mind inclines towards the changing matter, the changing prakruti, we experience a state of anxiety, sadness, misery, frustration. But the more the chitta comes towards the state of the soul, the unchanging nature of the soul, the more the chitta is in a permanent state, in an unchanging state, we experience happiness or bliss. And this is the key principle that Patanjali is trying to point out, that if we can just learn to regulate these fluctuations of the chitta, we can learn to control our life, our experiences of life. And this is the key for us. And this is a very, very powerful sutra. If you think about it, in our pursuits of life, we are constantly trying to enhance the quality of our life by changing the things around us. We are thinking that happiness comes by changing the environment where I am in, by changing the people that I am with, by changing the things that are in my possession. But Patanjali is changing the entire perspective upside down. And he's saying, no, happiness comes not by an external change, but by an internal change, by changing the chitta. So the whole point that Patanjali is trying to present here is that we need to learn to bring the chitta to a more stable state. And that is the key for us. So the traditional acharyas, they explain that how, imagine if the chitta is like this big lake. The world around us is constantly disturbing the status of that lake. You know, like sometimes when you throw pebbles in the lake, there are so many ripples that which are formed, right? And you throw bigger stones, literally, there are no more ripples, but they'll transform into waves. So these waves are what are called as vrittis or chitta vrittis. And these fluctuations or waves in our consciousness is what we are trying to regulate through yoga. And therefore, the whole definition that Patanjali is giving us here is, yoga is a process of restraining these modifications of our consciousness, right? And very important point to note here is, in our yoga practice, we are not trying to negate the mind. We are not trying to suppress the mind. We are not trying to destroy the lake. We are trying to bring the lake back to its original state of calm and serenity. That is the state of mind that we need to bring it into, right? So this is another popular misconception people carry, that spirituality is all about negating the mind, suppress the mind, destroy the mind, repress the mind. That will only, repression is not going to accomplish anything, but rather our goal is to restrain these fluctuations and bring the mind closer to the spirit, bring the chitta closer to the Purusha, and thereby restrain its fluctuations. And this is the key principle that Patanjali is trying to present in this very, very important sutra. And by this sutra, he's setting the tone for the rest of the book, what he's planning to teach us. This is the ultimate, the foundational goal that Patanjali is presenting to us. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha, to restrain the modifications of the consciousness. Like that. All right. So these are the 3 key points that we learned today. First, we understood that yoga practice is not just about the physical body or about the breath restraints and so on, right? These are all there, but the central theme is about the chitta, about learning to control the mind. And what exactly the chitta? We understood the chitta is an interface between the unchanging soul and the changing matter. And because this chitta is playing that role of an interface, it has both changing and unchanging characteristic. And according to state of chitta, our experiences are defined. Therefore, we don't want to destroy the mind. Mind is not the problem. It is the mind's fluctuations which are the problem. Therefore, we're not trying to negate the mind, but we are trying to restrain its modifications. That is the key that we learn from this sutra. In the subsequent sutras, Patanjali is going to tell us what happens when you actually restrain these modifications, what exactly are these modifications, and what is the process of restraining these modifications. So please do join us for the future sessions as part of this Yoga Sutras Wisdom series. Thank you all so much. Hare Krishna.